decrease. The patient's going to become hyponatremic. This would be a positive fluid balance. They're taking in more than they're putting out. Okay? Now, typically in hypotonic hydration, when there's pure water they're taking in, you really don't see much edema. And of course, you're not going to see signs of hypovolemia, because in most cases their volume status is a little bit increased. If someone is simply taking in more water than they should be, okay, many times it's a reflection of a psychologic disorder called psychogenic polydipsia. Okay. It's not uncommon in psychiatric patients. But there are other causes of excess water intake. Someone who's got renal insufficiency. Generally, these patients, if they have severe renal insufficiency, we fluid restrict them, because the renal insufficiency is going to impair their ability to filter the blood and excrete water. So if they take in too much water, they'll be in a positive fluid balance. Or SIADH refers to syndrome of inappropriate antidiuretic hormone secretion. In other words, they're producing too much ADH, which means they're holding on to water, they're not excreting it. It results in a positive fluid balance. Okay? SIADH can be caused by drugs. These are mostly psychotropic drugs, for instance, that might be used for schizophrenia. Certain CNS disorders, central nervous system disorders, can lead to excess production of ADH. And then certain malignancies. Okay? I think we've referred to this before, in that malignancies consist of cells that have gone rogue. They're reproducing at an excessively rapid rate, and many times the internal control mechanisms are out of whack, particularly with regard to production of products that the cells typically produce, typically in terms of transcription and translation. All cells have the same set of genetic instructions, but in certain cells, only part of that instructional booklet is actually read. For instance, in muscle cells generally don't produce let's say, antibodies. They're capable, they have the set of genetic instructions to do so, but those genes are suppressed. And in turn, in muscle cells, the genes that produce muscle proteins, like actin and myosin, they're turned on. Okay? Now, with these malignancies, genes that previously were suppressed get induced or turned on. And so many times, malignant cells will begin to produce hormones that they typically don't produce. So you can have certain malignancies that begin producing ADH. Well, that's SIADH. That's a syndrome of inappropriate ADH secretion. In this case, it's ectopic ADH production. The ADH is not being produced by the posterior pituitary. It's being produced at a different site. So we say it's ectopic. So regardless of the cause, the person is becoming water intoxicated. Okay? So the osmolarity of their extracellular fluid is going to decrease. What happens at the level of the central nervous system? Water starts to move into neurons, and these neurons expand. And with that, it leads to dysfunction. Now, if someone, normal serum sodium is, let's say, 135 to, let's say, 150 milliequivalents per liter. Okay? If you fall down to 132, that's a laboratory sign of the fact that you're hyponatremic. You're probably a little bit water intoxicated, but you're not going to have much in the way of symptoms. If that serum sodium falls down to 120, and again, it depends on how rapidly it occurs, the patient may be in trouble. What type of symptoms can they develop? Nausea and vomiting. Okay. This nausea and vomiting is simply a reflection of increased intracranial pressure, the fact that the neurons are swelling, that pressure is increasing. That's an early sign. They can develop cerebral edema. Again, it's a matter of that more fluid is entering into the cells of the brain, the neurons. Okay? And they can develop mental status changes. In fact, when the serum sodium falls below 120, the patient can start to become obtunded or stuporous, even become comatose. Below 120, the patient is at risk of seizing. Okay? They can also develop problems like muscle cramping, which is not so much a problem with the central nervous system, but it's simply the movement of electrolytes across muscle membrane. Finally, my favorite fluid electrolyte problem is edema. Okay? It's the accumulation of fluid within the interstitial space, which leads to tissue swelling. Everyone here by now, at this time, should be able to list those 4 causes. So I have no doubt if I pointed to Kat, or maybe to Sarah, or to maybe Abby, or maybe to JJ, that you'd be able to rattle off. Okay, these are the 4 causes. Kat, give me one of them, just to appease me. One cause of edema. Kat, you know this. You got nothing?
No.
Sarah?
Oh, no, it's even worse. She got it
Increased
yesterday.
oncotic pressure? No. Decreased?
Decreased oncotic pressure.
Okay, wait. Increased hydrostatic pressure. Decreased oncotic pressure. Obstruction.
Lymphatic obstruction.
Lymphatic obstruction.
And
I don't know. The other one.
Abby?
Capillary permeability.
Yeah, that's it.
Increased permeability. Increased permeability. So, edema is a surprisingly common problem. It's really a reflection of some underlying disorder. When someone's edematous, it could be congestive heart failure, it could be that they have a deep venous thrombosis, it could be that they have a nephrotic syndrome and they're leaking protein into the urine, it could be they have cirrhosis and they're not producing protein, it could be that they have some inflammatory state and they have swelling, it could be they had surgery and part of the lymphatic drainage was removed. There are a lot of causes for edema. But when you see someone who's edematous, either they exhibit generalized edema or it's localized edema, then in your mind you're going through those 4 mechanisms and you're asking, what's going on here? What's causing this? Okay? But basically what's happening is fluid is leaving the bloodstream, which is part of the extracellular space, and it's entering into the interstitial compartment. Okay? Now, when that happens, when water leaves the bloodstream, extravasates into the interstitial space, what happens to intravascular volume? It decreases. So intravascular volume falls, and as the patient becomes edematous, they also begin to release renin and activate the renin-angiotensin pathway. That's brought about by the decrease in intravascular volume. That volume has shifted into the interstitial space. So they begin producing angiotensin II and aldosterone and ADH. So the body begins to hold on to more salt and water. If the underlying mechanism that's causing edema is not resolved, as they hold on to more salt and water, more water extravasates. So edema begets edema. Unless you do something to correct the underlying mechanism. Unless you treat the congestive heart failure. Unless you treat the infection or inflammation. Now, these patients may have increased total body sodium. Why? Because they're producing a lot of aldosterone. That's holding on to salt. But still, they hold on to even more water. So despite an increase in total body salt, they're still hyponatremic. If someone's got cirrhosis, many times these people walk around with generalized edema. Their abdomen is distended with ascites. Their lower extremities exhibit pitting edema. Sometimes they'll have edema along the sacral region. These people are just one big old bag of fluid. Why are people with cirrhosis so edematous?
Because they have decreased oncotic pressure.
Why do they have decreased oncotic pressure?
Because the liver produces a lot of your proteins.
Yeah, it produces about 95% of your serum protein. So if your liver is not working, serum protein concentrations are going to fall. Or you ever see these little babies that are starving in Africa? You would think they'd be real skinny, but instead you see their abdomen is bloated and full of fluid. They're edematous. Why? They're not getting any protein. Protein malnutrition. If you're not getting any amino acids, then you can't produce proteins. Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about electrolytes, principally sodium and potassium. Okay. We said that salt, sodium, is freely filtered, and that 70% of the filtered sodium gets reabsorbed in the PCT. The leucophenolate reabsorbs another 20%. What happens distal to that in the PCT and collecting duct depends upon levels of aldosterone. Okay? If levels of aldosterone are high, like we see in edematous states, then all the remaining filtered sodium is reabsorbed in the late PCT and collecting duct. Wow, I did it again. You look at something like this and it's just, you say, wow, what? No. It gives you a headache just looking at it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Combine all the rest.
But we're going to just ignore everything here. Okay, and we're just going to look at a little bitty piece of it at a time. This is what happens if our blood pressure begins to fall. Okay? We're going to ignore a lot of this stuff. We're just going to look here. In the face of a drop in blood pressure, baroreceptors are inhibited. That means impulses going up to the cardiovascular centers are decreased. That's going to result in a sympathetic reflex, where we're going to have sympathetic output from the cardiovascular and vasomotor center of the brainstem, and it's going to cause peripheral arteries to undergo vasoconstriction. That results in increased systemic vascular resistance, and blood pressure begins to come up. That's easy. Everybody remembers that, right? Now, here is what happens at the level of the kidneys. Okay? There's decreased stretch in the afferent arterioles. Remember, we said that those JG cells are baroreceptors. Okay? And when there's a decrease in stretch, okay, then that's detected by the cells of the JG apparatus, the JG cells, and they release renin. At the same time, okay, in the face of a drop in blood pressure, you're going to have decreased filtration at the level of the corpuscle. So you can produce less filtrate. Your GFR is going to fall. Flow through the renal tubule is going to be more sluggish. Okay. And as that filtrate moves sluggishly through the renal tubule, it gives more time for sodium and other solutes to be, for water to be reabsorbed. So the solute concentration reaching the macular density is increased. Okay, that activates that tubuloglomeralar mechanism, and the JG cells also release renin in response to that mechanism. So we're activating the renin-angiotensin system, so we'll get at. Okay? So in the end, we're producing aldosterone, which is causing retention of salt, which is increasing blood volume, which is increasing blood pressure. Angiotensin 2 is also going to cause vasoconstriction, increase peripheral vascular resistance, and increase blood pressure. Okay? The drop in blood volume is going to be set by the posterior pituitary, which releases ADH. So we're going to hold on to water. So as sodium is reabsorbed, we also hold on to water. This is one of these algorithms, these pathways, that when you first look at it, oh my goodness, I hate to look at this, but it tells you exactly what the body's doing. If you're well prepared, if you know the material, you can follow the algorithm and say, oh yeah, this makes sense. That in the face of a drop in blood pressure, our aldosterone level should be high. In the face of a drop in blood pressure, ADH level is going to be high. Okay. We're going to be vasoconstricting because we're going to activate baroreceptor reflexes. We're going to be vasoconstricted and we're going to be holding on to the salt and water. All right, let's look at potassium. 70% of the filtered potassium gets reabsorbed in the PCT. This is just like sodium. Another 20% of the filtered potassium gets reabsorbed in the ascending limb, the loop belly. That leaves 10% of the filtered potassium still to be excreted. Okay. Now, what happens next in the DCD and collecting duct somewhat depends on body needs. If more potassium is reaching the cortical portion of the collecting duct, that cortical portion is going to tend to secrete additional potassium, particularly in the face of high potassium levels. So as blood with a high potassium concentration is flowing through those peritubular capillaries, if the potassium level is high, then some of that potassium is going to be secreted at the level of the cortex in the collecting ducts. Okay? Okay. The cells within the collecting duct that do so are called principal cells. Now, on the other hand, when potassium levels are low, less potassium gets secreted. So there's a direct relationship between potassium levels and the amount of baseline potassium secretion.
I'm sorry, where did you say the principal cells were?
They're in the collecting duct.
Okay.
They're the cells that are involved in, really, they're involved in that sodium potassium pump also. But it's a simple basal potassium. In other words, these cells are constantly secreting potassium. And if